Hey there. We're diving deep into a story today. It's about community and resilience and, the unexpected things that can happen after a natural disaster.
Right.
We're headed down to Lake Lure, North Carolina.
Yep.
This is in the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. You'll hear directly from residents, volunteers, and, well, let's just say this isn't your typical hurricane relief effort.
Yeah, what really struck me here is how a crisis can really expose those vulnerabilities, not just like physical vulnerabilities, but vulnerabilities in trust and in the systems that, we all rely on.
Okay, so paint the picture for us.
Yeah,
It's the days after Hurricane Helene. Lake Lure is isolated, roads are impassable, communication is down, and people are desperate. I mean, they need basic supplies.
absolutely. And in those first few chaotic days and moments after a disaster like that, clear information, reliable help, it's essential, but it wasn't always easy to come by in Lake Lure.
And that's where we find two residents, Corinne Harris and Hillary Yaxel. And they're stepping up. I mean, they start this relief effort, just trying to fill the void right in an Ingles supermarket parking lot.
Wow.
Hot coffee, collecting donations, real grassroots stuff.
It's really amazing to see that, though, just how people come together in those situations, the
Yeah.
compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. But then things take a turn. A group calling themselves Veterans on Patrol shows up, led by a guy named Lewis Arthur. They promise resources, aid, even a 3-year rebuilding plan. On paper, sounds like exactly what Lake Lure needs.
It's almost like a pattern you see in these situations, right? Groups,
Yeah.
wanting to help. But as we'll see, good intentions don't always translate into effective action.
And this is where it gets interesting. Even Corinne and Hillary, who are desperate for help at this point, they start getting this uneasy feeling about Veterans on Patrol.
Huh.
Hillary, who's a retired Army nurse, she talks with Arthur, and, he starts saying things about, like, needing armed security, fighting cartels. Just kind of sets off alarm bells.
Yeah, that's when you really need to be thinking critically. I mean, it's so easy to just grasp onto any solution offered in a chaotic situation, but you got to evaluate those offering the help as much as the help itself, right?
Would you be more trusting or extra cautious, in a situation like that?
Right.
So Corinne and Hillary, they didn't even know the half of it yet. Turns out, Veterans on Patrol had a history, anti-government sentiment, ties to conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
This was not your typical disaster relief organization.
No, not at all. And they believed, for example, that, get this, that the government was using Hurricane Helene as a cover for seizing land, for its lithium,
Wow.
which was a conspiracy theory making the rounds online. And it just played right into this existing distrust of authority in certain circles. And this is where it gets really, complex. Because remember, this was all unfolding right after Hurricane Helene, emotions were high, and there was already a ton of scrutiny on those disaster relief efforts.
Totally. Everyone was glued to social media, right? Sharing those stories, images, videos, it felt impossible to sort fact from fiction.
Exactly. And that environment where everything's moving so fast, it creates this breeding ground for misinformation. It's like rumors and speculation, they take hold, especially when people are anxious, uncertain.
And it wasn't like those anxieties were totally unfounded. There were legitimate concerns about how prepared agencies were, about how those resources were being allocated. It's a lot for a community to deal with after, such a devastating event.
Yeah, it's overwhelming and people need answers. And unfortunately, they were often met with more confusion, conflicting information. And that creates a vacuum. And groups like Veterans on Patrol, well, they can step right in.
So now you have this group with their own agenda showing up in Lake Lure. And they're, setting up shop right there in that Ingles parking lot. They've got American flags, trucks, almost like this air of authority.
Right.
It's easy to see how some residents, especially in that chaos, might have been drawn to that.
Especially when you think about how many folks were already wary, maybe distrustful of the government's response. And whether or not you think those suspicions were valid, the fact is Veterans on Patrol could really capitalize on that feeling.
And it wasn't like they weren't trying to provide some help, it seems like. But then those cracks that Hillary and Corinne started to see, they just become impossible to ignore.
Exactly right. They start hearing things from other residents, learning more about this group, and some red flags pop up. I mean, they see those social media posts from Veterans on Patrol, talking about all this aid they're providing, but something just doesn't add up.
And remember, this is a small town. Word spreads fast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Soon there are whispers about where those donations are actually going, about the group's true motives. It creates this, unsettling feeling in the community, you know what I mean?
It's a classic case of how even the best intentions can get totally warped by suspicion and that lack of reliable information, you know what I mean? What started with this outpouring of support, neighbors helping neighbors, it got fractured.
And it all kind of explodes, in a way, with this really tense standoff in that Ingles parking lot. So we've got, tensions are high, those rumors are spreading like wildfire, and it all leads to this very public confrontation right in the Ingles parking lot.
Wow.
Makes you think, right, this wasn't just about, like, a difference of opinion. This was about misinformation having real consequences.
It absolutely does. And sadly, it's becoming more and more common. It's almost like a pattern, disaster hits, then that misinformation spreads like wildfire. And groups with, let's say, questionable motives, they see an opportunity.
It's unsettling, for sure. And it makes you wonder, what can we do? How can we be more resilient? Not just to the hurricanes and the earthquakes and the disasters themselves, but to that wave of misinformation that seems to follow.
Right, yeah. And that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Part of it has to be on us, on individuals. We have to be more careful about the information we're taking in and, more importantly, what we're sharing.
Yeah.
Think critically, check those sources. Don't just retweet something without, stopping for a second to think, where did this come from?
We need to be aware of our own biases too, right? It's easy to just eat up information that already lines up with what we believe,
Absolutely. We need to support organizations fighting that misinformation. The fact checkers, investigative journalists, even local libraries, they're so important.
And sometimes, and this is tough, we have to have those awkward conversations, the ones with friends and family who might be, spreading misinformation. It's not about, being right. It's about encouraging everyone to think critically, you know what I mean?
I hear you. It's more about healthy skepticism than, being right all the time, right?
Exactly.
And the reality is we're all vulnerable to this. But by being informed, by promoting a culture of truth-seeking, maybe, just maybe, we can lessen the impact.
Well said. So, our deep dive into Lake Lure, this wasn't just a local story, was it?
Not at all.
It's a reminder. It's a warning about misinformation, trust, and the need to be careful, especially when a crisis hits.
It reminds us, think critically, reliable information is key, and a good dose of, like you said, healthy skepticism, more crucial now than ever,
This deep dive, a lot to think about, huh? We'd love to hear your thoughts on everything we discussed today. What resonated with you? Share your takeaways, keep that conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed.